Professor Kalman. We're delighted that you're willing to receive the Nordic Process Control Award, and we congratulate you on receiving it. And we're sorry to hear that you will not be able to make it to the meeting in Trondheim in January 2015, but we hope that you will be able to attend in the next meeting, that will be in 2016 in Stockholm. Okay, so thank you very much for you agreeing to be interviewed here. And the Nordic Process Control workshop attracts a lot of young people. So we'd like to first start and focus a little bit on the earlier part of your extremely successful career. So could you tell us a little bit about your background and what motivated you to go into engineering?
Well, it's not an overly short story.
We have time.
My father is of a pure Hungarian background, and his ancestors were landowners and soldiers. In fact, my grandfather was a general of the cavalry in Austria-Hungary. But my father broke with that tradition when he went to a Technische Hochschule in Karlsruhe, which he finished just at the beginning of World War I. After that, however, he had all sorts of problems, like many other people, and although he had a degree in engineering, mechanical and electrical engineering, for various periods of time, he was not able to work professionally until just before the war, and then he talked frequently about the fact that he would like to have a laboratory and do research, and had two sons. I'm the older one, and hoped that we would assist him in this endeavor. But unfortunately then the war came, and there were all sorts of problems, so he never really realized his ambition to do that. On the other hand, he did influence me to become interested in engineering. Okay. And that influence stayed with me all my life. I'm still interested in engineering, but I'm looking at it somewhat more from the global point of view, so to say, which involves physics and mathematics and a number of other things as well. So it's not pure engineering, but it also isn't anything pure otherwise. I might add that there are many people in the past who had somewhat similar careers. I have particular admiration for Newton, who was currently reputed to be a great physicist, but in actual fact he was even greater as a mathematician, and he was a pretty good engineer. And he also retained his interest in engineering all his life. He began by making a model, this or that, and for example a solar clock and things of that sort. And just as in my case, if I may say so, that interest stayed with him all his life and considerably influenced his scientific work.
So, how did you then, from your interest in engineering, get into feedback control?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. After the war, with some delay, I very much wanted to go to MIT to finally begin my education in higher education, which was badly interrupted by the war. And before doing that, I was interested in the Laplace transform, which is ironic because my later work showed that the Laplace transform was totally misplaced in the areas of engineering that I was interested in. But one of my professors said, why don't I go to the servo mechanisms laboratory at MIT, where they use a lot of Laplace transforms. And that's how I got involved.
Okay.
So I read some books on servo mechanisms, especially Brown and Campbell, which was a relatively easy book to read, and so I got more and more into the same thing, and less into Laplace and so on.
Wow. So, can you describe the status of feedback control in the early part of your career in the 50s?
Well, I will diplomatically not elaborate on that point, but feedback control was an essential part of the engineering side of the U.S. war effort, especially fire control of airplanes, anti-aircraft, guns, and all sorts of things, and also in the Navy. And it was a very successful but very hastily put together endeavor. And after the war, there was a certain sort of slackening of interest, and less intense attention was being paid to that. Right at that point, I became interested in the subject of nonlinear mechanics, having read a book by Minorsky, who was a very outstanding Russian engineer who also worked during World War II and came to America as a refugee from after World War I from communism. Yeah, I actually met him briefly after many years.
Okay, so after the war...
And well, at that point of time, I went to MIT in 1951, and at that point of time there was sort of a change because people started looking at things from a bit more fundamental, a bit more mathematical point of view. So I was sort of in the middle of that activity, which was mainly carried out outside of MIT, not inside MIT. On the other hand, MIT had a lot of experience because of the radiation laboratory being situated there during the war. But many people who worked there then left after the war and went back to their own university. So the effort was sort of less focused, but at the same time more spread out over America. Okay. A little bit also in Europe because of the German effort with the V2 rockets, for example.
Okay, so after the war, the intensity just went down in the research
at MIT, but on the other hand, it also spread out and increased in terms of other countries being involved, or other countries becoming known that they have already done some parallel effort during the war when communication was not possible between various parties.
Okay, so that's when you started, and how was then your early work results? How were they received by the control community? What did they think about it?
Oh, well, I would say that if you worry about that topic too much, then maybe you should look for another job.
Okay, but in retrospect, when you look back, what were their reactions?
Generally fairly friendly and not too well informed.
Okay.
For example, after I had my doctorate, I worked for a year at IBM in 1957 to 58, and we were sort of, IBM had an effort in process control at that point, and I was sort of one of the instigators of that. And we were supposed to have some contact at MIT to learn from what they were doing. And this was a little bit embarrassing, both sides, because I probably knew more in some respects about the subject than they did at that time. And in fact, we had an interesting incident. We took a nice airplane to Boston from Poughkeepsie, and my former sort of semi-supervisor, George Newton, was involved in a meeting, and he began the discussion by saying that it took me 30 years to understand this problem, which was a single loop control system. But Gordon Brown, who was the head of the electrical engineering department at the time, was also there. This was our first session. And Gordon said to George Newton, he says, "But George, you can't expect us to sit here for 30 years. We were the same thing. So that gives an idea of the situation at that time.
Wow. Yeah. So today everybody in the control community knows about the Kalman filter.
Yes.
But other filters were suggested at that time too. For example, the Leuenberger observer. What was different about your work?
Well, that I can demolish very briefly. The Leuenberger observer was maybe 2, 3, 4 years after my work, and it's a small special case of a problem already solved in my. It was not, but it was valid. It was a valid result. But whenever a field starts moving, people don't quite appreciate where the real problems are, and I presume he thought that he found something quite interesting, and it was interesting, but it was already done before.
So he wasn't aware of the connection?
I don't know.
Oh.
He certainly didn't. I went to Stanford 5 years after the publication of the first publication of the filter, and as far as I recall, the Leuenberger thing was published maybe just before I went there, or just after, and I don't remember his rushing to me to find out whether he did something new or not. But that's quite normal.
Yeah.
So I say nothing wrong with it, but it's also, well, trumped by something else, which is more serious.
Yeah, that's good. Now, have you ever worked with process control as well?
Yes, well, actually not quite, but I did spend a year at DuPont with some small contact with process control. This was in 1954, and then after my doctorate, this group was at IBM was interested in process control, but we were sort of circling the problem, figuring out what to do next and so forth, and nothing much happened in the area of process control per se while I was there, but the effort did continue somewhat after my time, so I was well aware of problems in process control, but the times were not quite right for making a big effort because the computers were small and slow and not enough storage, and there were many other problems involving measurements and so forth. So I was sort of at the dawn of, present at the dawn of process control, and I kept up with it a little bit through friends, but I didn't actually make anything that I could call a contribution.
Well, the Kalman filter is used quite a lot there too.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
One knew from the beginning that something like a Kalman filter would be very an important contribution. Actually, at that time it was called the Wiener filter, but it addressed essentially the same problem. But the Wiener filter was so impractical in terms of the possibilities that existed at that time that everybody was waiting for something to happen. And by accident it did happen, but it didn't happen along the lines that Wiener had originally envisaged. So it was an interesting incident.
So now we've looked a little bit backwards, where we've seen something in your career. Now, if you look into the future, what do you consider to be the main future challenges to be solved by the control community?
Yes, well, that question has been debated a great deal. At the time when, and maybe for another 10 years when the Kalman filter came into existence, the main interest was about nonlinear control. I mean, the main future interest was about nonlinear control. And that ran into mathematical obstacles of such an enormous nature that a true and really fundamental solution there would probably require another 100 years, judging by the past history of mathematical efforts of the sort. On the other hand, there were a lot of less ambitious projects related to that, and these are currently being done and applied and so forth. So the goal at that point was too ambitious, but the subject was very worthwhile. On the other hand, the essential aspect of control is basically precision, accuracy, and the achievable accuracy, achievable performance depends very much on how accurately you can model or measure or interact with the environment in which control is supposed to take place. As an example, the global positioning system, the GPS, which has been around for maybe 20 years approximately, 20 years, at least 20 years after the Kalman filter when it began, and it is now 55 years, so there was a lot of experience in applying the thing to actual real-world problems. The GPS system has achieved enormous accuracies that were not even dreamt of maybe 30 years ago. And this is due to the continual refinement of the measurement of the environment and of the various factors which affect the accuracy. One of the factors affecting accuracy is the accuracy of the location achieved by global positioning system, is that you must have a very accurate timing standard, which has nothing much to do with the Kalman filter, but also it has to be combined with a very accurate measurement and knowledge of the satellites involved in the process. I don't know exactly how many satellites there are in the American system, but maybe 5, 8, something like that. And the Japanese are planning a new system with something like 25 or 30 satellites.
Okay.
And the accuracy that achievable depends on the number of satellites and on the accuracy with which the satellite orbits can be inferred from in various ways from the measurements in the general system. That accuracy has gradually increased. The first major application of Kalman filtering was in satellite orbits, for example, in the moon landing and things like that. And that continued, the refinement of accuracy continued all the time, until we have now almost the accuracy that if I move my nose 1 centimeter, at least the Japanese, but probably others, will also be able to tell you that. And that's absolutely fantastic by the conditions that existed at the time, namely 1959-60, when the Kalman filter was discovered.
Okay, so the future challenge is to get...
I'm talking about a specific case of feedback control, but and the GPS system is something that uses very heavily the Kalman filter type of operations. But in control in general, everything depends on how accurately you can measure the thing that you want to control. And a number of other things as well, but the detailed knowledge of the environment in which control is supposed to take place is the most important single thing.
Yeah.
For example, nowadays the only progress in improving the performance of passenger cars is through electronics, and the electronics is related to detailed knowledge of how the internal combustion engine works, and measuring temperatures and timing and all sorts of other things. And the advances in that knowledge are basically the same as the advances in the automotive technology at the present time. So very little other advance has been made as far as the engine is concerned.
So would it be fair to say, like, the modeling is one of the...
Well, modeling is a misused word. The modeling just means that you write down in a usable, precise form the knowledge that you have.
Okay.
Modeling is sometimes done a priori. You think it should be like that, but that's useless unless you add real measurements to the thing. And that's where the main problem is. There's no problem in modeling physical laws because they have been known for a long time. But the problem is to put in the correct constants relevant to the particular problem that you're interested in. Okay. So obviously controlling an engine is not the same thing as a GPS system. It's a totally different kind of situation, but the basic issue of accuracy is the same.
Okay. So now, if you look back again at your career, what would you say is the main decision or event that made it so successful?
Well, there are several factors. One of the things is that, if I may say so, I was an excellent doctoral student in the sense that I did a lot of reading of the literature, I collected a lot of reprints, I spent a lot of time looking around to what was happening and so forth. So as a result of that, the actual genesis of the Kalman filter was simply a large graduate level exercise consisting of many pieces that had to be put together, but nothing sort of astoundingly different from what was being done. What happened, however, is that probably at that time in the general scheme of things, I was probably the only graduate student who was able to do the exercise because I had the knowledge coming from various sources that allowed me to formulate the problem and to carry through the exercise in solving the problem. This seldom happens, but it does happen.
Yeah, that's good. So, from your long career, what advice would you give to a young researcher or a PhD student who is ambitious in academia?
Yes. Well, first of all, I am not very fond of the word academia. And one reason for saying that is that academic organization, so is a very cultural thing, and in many countries it's quite different from other countries. And it has a very long and tortuous history. In the public mind, a university exists to teach students to get a good job. That, however, is not a good reason for the university to exist. And basically, the real function of university is to maintain the knowledge that has already been achieved, which is a difficult thing and requires a lot of effort, a lot of people and so forth. And while doing that, give people enough of a rope, enough of a leash, so to say, to do new things if they are able to do that, or if they want to do that, or if for some reason it is necessary to do that. So, as a result of that, for example, if you take cancer research, the advances in research, which is my main interest, of course, as you may have gathered, advances in research are not particularly clearly tied to any university, organization, or career. But on the other hand, they have some interaction, because you may need laboratories or computers or libraries and so forth, which a private individual is not able to achieve in the same way as a large organization like a university. I would say that you should not look upon, if you're interested in research mainly, you should not look upon university as the end-all of all activity, but you should be aware of the various constraints and problems that are involved in the current university system. For example, to do research today requires a kind of union card, which is called a doctorate. Maybe in the future it will require 2 doctorates, like it does in Russia, for example.
Okay.
On the other hand, the university, for political and public relations reasons, doesn't like to be too involved in this sort of a discussion. And for example, Charles West, who died recently, I think about a year ago, who was the president at MIT in the I think late 1900s or maybe early 2000s, once declared publicly, which you probably would not want to repeat again, he says, if you don't like teaching, you should immediately look for another job. Now, there's nothing wrong with teaching, but at the same time, teaching itself does not create new knowledge, because you obviously depend on...
Yeah.
And as my friend Dick Bellman put it, who was very influential in shaking up the scene of research, especially in the control area, said that basically an academic career is almost hopeless. A pure academic career is almost hopeless, because there are only 2 ways you can make a big career. One is an unusually, you're an unusually good expositor. People can explain things simply and clearly and concisely, etc., are in great demand. But of course, when you go to university, most of the professors are not like that.
Yeah.
So it depends on you, not on the university. And the other thing is that you have very original ideas, and again, 90% of the people at the university don't have original ideas. They just use it as a job. I mean, this is a normal human situation, there's nothing wrong with it, and so forth, but that's how it is. So in embarking on a research career, you should bear that in mind. And you should have a certain amount of judgment about your own abilities, but not to the extent of being discouraged or not being ambitious. So I would say research is an enormously interesting thing, especially in areas where you're not too constrained. For example, in mathematics, you're not constrained, although it's very good if you know something about the constraints later on. Unlike, say, in pharmacology, where you're supposed to develop a drug that cures cancer. That's not a good way of starting research. Because you may discover another kind of drug that makes horses run faster or something like that, and that may be more worthwhile at a given time, or more possible at a given time, than discover a drug that cures cancer, which may be completely out of sight. So you have to consider this aspect of the thing, but at the same time, don't be discouraged. Be realistic about your own abilities, but not to the extent of being moody and saying, "Oh, I can never do this," or something like that.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And maybe just, is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, I would like to say that in my particular case at least, and also in the case of Newton and numerous other people, the most exciting thing in the research and in science and engineering in general is that you suddenly see a possibility of doing things that were not done before, solving a problem that was not done before. But that cannot be achieved by being overly narrowly specialized, which unfortunately is a constraint on most people until they get the doctorate. So don't be too worried about what you have to do to get a doctorate, but take advantage of the freedom that the doctorate offers afterwards. My definition of engineering is something like twofold. One is that you do something that has never been done before. So, for example, the current development of computers, which of course demanded hundreds, thousands of people to reach the present level, is something that was unimaginable 100 years ago. I'm a great fan of Jules Verne, but he didn't imagine a computer. He imagined certain other things which are still not done. So you have to look at what's possible, but also what is something that hasn't been done before. And the other thing in engineering is, which is a more practical thing, is that you can make things work without knowing exactly how or why they work. And that gives engineering a very special flavor, but very few people measure up to that level or have the opportunity to do that. And I would say that should not discourage people from trying or thinking in that direction. For example, one of the great engineering geniuses of the 20th century was Ferdinand Porsche, who came from a farming family on the border area, which is currently between Austria and Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, not Slovakia. And he had, at the age of something like 15, electrified the farm of his parents. Now, that combines two things. One, I'm sure he didn't know everything about electricity, and at the same time he did something that wasn't done before. And he continued doing that all his career. He is the one who designed the famous Volkswagen, even though he did it for Hitler in some sense, but it was a considerable engineering achievement. And even after the war, he continued doing that sort of thing. So that's a very happy life. But it's not something that everybody a priori can plan on. I'm sure he didn't plan on it. But it's encouraging that it can be done. So that's one of the attractions of an engineering career. I mean, even if you can't do very much, you can make a few things work. Like a computer software doesn't work, you make it work. Okay, that can be done on a very low level or a very high level, and that's a very satisfying kind of activity. Which is not true, let's say, in the financial world, even though that brings in much more money.
I think that was a good final statement.
Okay.
So I would like to thank you very much for this interview, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in Sweden in 2016, August.
Yes, I hope so too.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.